So in 2015, when I stopped drinking and doing drugs and made that commitment, I was left with a dilemma. How do I do an abrupt change from a lifestyle that I have become so familiar with and be able to, to make it stick? Because it's never stuck before, but I knew the solution was there. So how can I wrap my mind around it? My magnificent, magnifying mind. And one thing that I had to do, and this was not negotiable, is I always had to have a cigarette in one hand and a coffee in the other, always at all times. And because the job that I had, the business I was running, uh, everybody was getting drunk around us. So how was I going to survive this? And it occurred to me that if I had one hand with coffee and the other hand had a cigarette in it, that I could not hold a beer. Most people, when they hear that, they laugh. And I saw you chuckling. I'm watching you. That that is so absurd. Because clearly you could have easily put down the cigarette or the coffee and had a free hand. I didn't allow myself to have that option. It was what it took. It was a process that I developed, that worked for me. And how is that any different than, the newcomer? There's the newcomer that I know who spent the first 2 months of his sobriety. He was retired, he was freshly divorced, and he would show up at the meeting house super early. And in between meetings, he would sit in his car and read the big book, or listen to self-help tapes on his car. Then he'd come out, visit for a little bit, go into a meeting, then boom, retreat back to the car. He did not leave for 2 months. Now, to me, that is a firm grasp of process addiction, because there's a lot of fear with breaking away from, the life of drugs and alcohol, and now you're in this stuff. And, it's like, I'm cool while I'm here. But what happens when I leave the parking lot? I'm now in the real world. And, and that became a major hang-up for me. Now, I did have to replace recovery with, I'm taking psychoactive drugs, the coffee and the cigarettes. But it was what I needed to take the edge off so that I could focus on the more important, relevant things. Now, I'm pretty sure that, it would be argued that, well, you're still not sober because you're taking psychoactive drugs. And really over the past 4 years, my habit was 8 pots of coffee a day, full pots, like the one we have over there inside the break room. 8 of those a day was my norm. And that's how much I didn't want to drink booze and do drugs, is that I had to drink that. And now I'm down to a pot, maybe a pot a day, if that much. But it was a gradual thing. And during times of panic, I will still pound back the coffees, because I haven't quite figured out how to move from the remaining addiction to no addiction. It's said that, in the big book, because it says that, the purpose of the book is to build your relationship with God. It has nothing to do with getting over alcohol or drugs. That it's literally to build your relationship with God. Well, I have a God personal to me. But I still have doubts. And it was mentioned that doubt is not the opposite of faith. It is actually one of the fundamental points of faith, is that you do have doubts. And that's what helps me grow. Now, there are some people that I've talked to in the program. There's a buddy of mine who I care about deeply, and he is a religious relapser. And while talking to him, he's like, man, I don't know what it is. I just can't seem to get it. And every time that I think that I'm doing well, I get a phone call, from somebody, and it immediately puts the thought in my head, and boom, I'm off to the races. And I had talked to him about, sharing this part of his story, that because I didn't want to break his anonymity, and I didn't want to make him uncomfortable, about this. But I asked him, because he said, this time I think it'll be different. And it's like, well, why? I mean, what stands out this time versus any other time that you've done? And he said, well, I've actually got a big book and I'm starting to read it. And I've got a sponsor now. And he's going to work with me. Now, I am so grateful to hear that, because he's no longer trying to die. He's trying to do something better for himself. He's doing the impossible. He's working to stay sober. But, on the surface, when I hear this, like, wait a second, all these times you didn't have a big book? And you're wondering why it didn't work? You didn't get a sponsor and you're wondering why it didn't work? Well, that's a different part of the process addiction. Because it asks, is there physical dependence? Yes, most assuredly. When I flip out, I don't pray. It's not the first thing that I do. Even though we teach each other, it's on every page in the big book, go to God. I will flip out and I will not be happy. And then I'll call my sponsor after a few days of misery. And he'll ask me, did you pray? Well, no. Click. And, I need to get my dependence on God, but I still think I can do it sometimes, alone. I'm still relying on other people to get me through this when I need to rely on God. And so the physical dependence is where I show up at meetings, which meetings I attend, which ones I avoid. The psychological dependence is when I'm flipping out, I think the only thing that's going to help me is going to the meetings. Now, to be fair, there's a lot of truth to that, because at the meeting houses, that's where newcomers come. It says it in everybody's story in the big book. It says that intensive work with another alcoholic will ensure immunity against the first drink. Now, I like to change it up and say the first think. And that really changes the entire book when you replace the word drink with think. Try it sometime. It's fun. But I go to the meetings because that's where I meet people, where I can have these intensive conversations. Because my normal routine is to go into my garage and I sit in there. And so far, 0 people have come up to my garage door, knocked on it, and said, hey, I heard you're in the program. Can you help me? So I have to break and interrupt the cycle of wanting to isolate when I'm hurting, and I go out there. So it takes me out of my comfort zone, my safe spot, so to speak. And I get to go out there, and I get to find people to be helpful to. Sometimes they track me down. I don't know. God has really done some interesting stuff in my life. And but this is where I get to learn. For the longest time, my life consisted of work, home, and AA. I had no idea that I was capable of doing anything else. And there was fear. It's like the triangle, right? Home, work, AA. And I would just do those because I was safe in those spots. But in those lines which connect those dots, that's where the fear was, because I'm now in the outside world. I don't get to practice the principles in all my affairs. I have to actually live them. I practice them in the room on how to be a good friend, how to be caring, how to be honest. I practice that in the rooms. And then I execute it outside in the world.